his obsession with the so-called far right comes through in almost everything he says and does. And here it is again. Here it is again. You know, and he's really saying, well, the flag is just the preserve of skinheads, and we can't allow that.
We had people with these flags throwing bricks at the very same police officers that I'd been shaking hands with.
I'm just going to say it, and the guy's a lying bastard, because I covered what happened that day. He was heckled, and he wasn't heckled by members of the far right, Rebecca. He was heckled by the friends of people who had just seen their young girls stabbed to death, in one case 150 times stabbed by this terrorist. And he was so gutless because he knew the truth at that point, but he was covering up the truth from the public. Breaking right now, Nigel Farage has responded to that revolting St. George's Day Downing Street speech by Slippery Starmer, where he decided to talk about the so-called riots after the Southport massacre and the fact that there are terrible people on the far right who are apparently trying to hijack our national flag. And Nigel, I think, actually did sum up the reason that Starmer is doing what he's doing pretty well. He claims that Starmer wants to paint this picture of the far right being full of skinheads, and you know what type of image that conjures up. And he also accused him of being obsessed with the far right. Watch.
Last night in number 10, the Prime Minister said, didn't he, that the battle for the flag is important. He referred to the riots in Southport and talked about the St George's flag. He said, we need to wrench it out of the hands of those who wish to divide this nation and reclaim it for good. What did he mean by that? Why is he linking fighting with the English flag?
His obsession with the so-called far right comes through in almost everything he says and does. And here it is again. Here it is again. You know, and he's really saying, well, the flag is just the preserve of skinheads, and we can't allow that. But
he's trying not to. He's trying to say we're all English, but we don't want it to be allow those groups to have it for themselves.
Too late, Prime Minister. Too late. Yeah. We're there already. We're there already. We're out and proud as English. And as I say, we got Welsh and Scottish and the other things that make up our party. They are scared. They know that there is a patriotic, old Labour, what we used to call working class, in the Midlands and the north of England, who are increasingly attracted by what reform has to say. They are in full panic mode. Morgan McSweeney is trying to pivot the Labour Party in a different position.
My superstar panel returned, Don Keith and Rebecca Jane. Rebecca, I was actually physically sickened by Starmer deciding that it was a really good opportunity on St. George's Day to talk about Southport, and by the way, to completely rewrite history. But isn't it also slightly interesting because, yes, Starmer is obsessed with the far right, but isn't Nigel also a little bit obsessed with what he believes is the far right and is almost playing into Starmer's hands by constantly trying to distance himself from the far right? Wouldn't it just be a much better and a much stronger position for Nigel to say, there is no far right in the United Kingdom. It doesn't exist. You're talking about our supporters, Reform UK supporters, who are actually good, honest, hardworking patriots who just a few years ago, Rebecca, would have been described as being on the centre right, or actually, in a lot of cases amongst working class folk, on the left.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's one thing about politicians, they're all obsessed with themselves. And like I said, they're all obsessed with attention. And again, it's that thing that he's doing where it's just creating more drama and more headlines of what soundbites can I throw out to get a bit more attention today. It's exhausting and it's ridiculous. I'm sick to death of hearing about far right, actually, because I think that this far right business is just a load of nonsense. I get called far right all the time. It's the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard. I feel very sent. Also, why do we try and categorize people? Why do we not just let them say what they are themselves instead of you're this, you're that? Clear off. Leave me alone. Keir Starmer, I can't cope with the guy. We know that. He's the worst prime minister we've ever had. We knew that that was going to be the case. He's proving it time and time again. And he needs to just shut up about the flag business, because what is wrong with being proud to be British? Keir Starmer makes it unpopular to love your country. That's what he does. And he won't be happy until he succeeds. The only problem is he's not succeeding, and he's not going to succeed, I hope.
The thing is, Don, he's also completely intellectually dishonest, and he has told blatant lies when it comes to Southport, for example, because if you look at Axel Rudakabana, who killed those 3 young girls in a terror attack, we're constantly being told, oh, no, he's a Christian. I mean, initially we were led to believe, look at that picture on the left, on the right, Don, that he was some type of Welsh choir boy. Well, actually, it was my conversation with Tommy Robinson in HMP Woodhill, which was able to provide confirmation of the fact that he had converted to Islam and was practicing as a Muslim behind bars. But really, that should hardly be a surprise, given the scumbag had an Al-Qaeda training manual in his bedroom. Yet I think so much of what's going on these days, Don, is like information control. We're constantly and consistently being lied to, and it's about trying to keep us down, trying to not let us be concerned about the reality of what is really happening to our country.
Yeah, that's right. You know, the left have become masters of indoctrination. They've been doing it for a long time now. And the Rudakabana thing, we saw that here in America in the Trayvon Martin case, where they used these images of him as a 10, 11-year-old boy when he was 18 or 19 young man. He looked very, very, very different at the time. They had all kind of details about him too. We still haven't gotten to the bottom, as far as I know, of the Rudakabana case. Where are his parents from? You know, why were they here? What were their political ideologies? Was there any connection to Rwandan genocide that I've seen a lot of reports about on social media? So I'd still like to get to the bottom of that and know what happened with that Rudakabana deal, and you know, where exactly his roots originate.
Of course, there's so much that we don't know. There's so much that we don't know about his parents and about whether they should face criminal investigation, or perhaps they are, but we can't talk about it because there's all of these ludicrous contempt of court laws. It's so shocking the degree that the establishment will use. Well, you can. Yeah, you certainly can where you are. And in fact, I'm serious, Don. More and more and more, I talk about the really shocking possibility that quite soon, for me to be able to broadcast a show which is telling the truth about what's really happening in the UK, it is highly possible that, like pirate radio back in the 70s, I will have to broadcast offshore. I'll have to potentially broadcast.
You can do the
America.
show and send it to me, and I'll post it for you. That way you'll get in no trouble.
Sadly, the way our legal system works, they can still drag me into court for that. But so it may actually come to the fact where I have to leave the country, which would be heartbreaking. It's something I don't want to do, but it just shows you the madness that we're dealing with. Rebecca, I just want to show you, sorry, I know it's painful, but I just want to listen just to the most egregious part of Starmer's speech.
Oh.
Sorry.
The day after the terrible Southport incident last year, I went up the next day to take the opportunity to shake the hands of the first responders. These were the police and the ambulance workers who had gone to the scene. By the time I got back to London that very day, we had people with these flags throwing bricks at the very same police officers that I'd been shaking the hands of.
Rebecca, that's the second day I've shown it, and I get more angry each time, and I'm just going to say it. And the guy's a lying bastard, because I covered what happened that day. he was heckled, and he wasn't heckled by members of the far right, Rebecca. He was heckled by the friends of people who had just seen their young girls stabbed to death, in one case 150 times stabbed by this terrorist. And he was so gutless because he knew the truth at that point, but he was covering up the truth from the public. He was so gutless, he wasn't even prepared to have a conversation with them. Do you remember? He scarpered after literally seconds and went back to Downing Street to have a party, to attend a party. So he is actually just gaslighting us now with this narrative about the events. And of course, the first responders were not able to say anything honest to him because they were being professional, weren't they? They were being professional police officers, professional ambulance officers, but the friends and the families and the Southport locals were desperate to talk to him because he knew we were not being told the truth about this scumbag. So I just think it's so shocking when we have a prime minister who is prepared to lie to that degree.
Narcissist.
Yes.
That's what we're dealing with. You know, the first thing he kicks off with, we're talking about one of the worst tragedies that can happen. And the first thing he kicks off with is, I went up to Southport. I'd bugger off. I can't remember if we can swear. But I've
But
just
too late
done
for
it,
that.
sorry.
I just called the guy a lying bastard.
Yeah, so, well, either way, so he's a narcissist. He makes it all about himself. He knew darn well he was lying through his teeth at that point in time. And not only that, he was lying through his teeth to detract away from the fact that he knew what was happening, and he put all the blame on. And I say us, obviously, I wasn't out rioting, but us as a nation reflected very, very strongly, obviously, about it. The place went up in flames. The whole country went up in flames because of that incident, because we knew we were being lied to, because we're sick of being lied to. It wasn't just that. It's everything that has gone before. And that man there's not one honest bone in his body, and he wants to make it all about him and all about what he did. It's a load of nonsense. And this is the point. We've got the literal evidence. Also, I don't really like how quickly it all went through the court systems and it all got dealt with and it all got shut down. We haven't actually made enough noise about that.
No, of course,
because
we have
everything
political
else
prisoners.
drags on for so long. Yeah, and and it's all done and dusted with now and put in this nice little box. No. Actually, there were major failings.
Totally.
We're being too quiet about it.
Totally.
We need to never forget how they handled this, and they really showed their true colours. And for the future, what else do we not know?
Here.
This was a major thing.
How can we ever trust anything they tell us again? But first, the reason you're watching this show is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to trust mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to determine which facts are true. And for good reason, given the ongoing debates over free speech, the controversy surrounding Brexit, and how Trump and other anti-establishment politicians are portrayed. But I have the solution. It's called Ground News, and it's the best way to stay informed and cut through media bias and manipulative narratives so you can get the facts for yourself. It's been a game changer for a news junkie like me. See for yourself at ground.news/outspoken. But I want to show you what is an incredible website and app in action. So let's look at that recent Supreme Court decision in the UK that ruled that women can only be biological adult human females, reversing years of trans extremism. Now, you can see clearly in one place that over 350 sources around the world are covering this story. Ground News instantly shows how it's being covered by the media, broken down by whether they lean to the left or the right. This is called the bias distribution chart. If you scroll down, you can see every headline about the story, along with the political bias and ownership of the publication. We can see for ourselves quite clearly, for example, that on the right, the Daily Wire covered the case very accurately with the headline, UK Supreme Court rules trans identifying men are not women. Spiked Online was even more forthright, declaring women exist, get over it. And the Daily Telegraph looked in depth at the disgraced famous faces who declared trans women are women. By stark contrast, the left-wing National said the result was only a victory for gender-critical feminists, and the Canary, this was my favourite for all the wrong reasons, ran with this clearly ludicrous headline, "Victory for the far right," as Supreme Court rolls back trans women's rights by 2 decades. Far right? Try calling J.K. Rowling that to her face. My favourite feature, though, of Ground News is the blind spot feed, which surfaces upwards of 20 stories daily that receive the majority of coverage from one side of the political spectrum. So if you love the news like I do, the blind spot feed is the best way to get a balanced perspective on what's happening. Go to ground.news/outspoken or scan the QR code on screen to subscribe today, and you'll get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use for unlimited access. That's ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show. And I mean, there, Don Keith, we're looking at some of the political prisoners. Julie Sweeney, a grandmother, in jail for over 2 years because of a Facebook post. Before that, we saw Lucy Connolly, a mother who was grieving a child who was killed by the British NHS. That is a fact. She is in jail for over 2 years because of a post on X. And I think the worst, Don Keith, is Peter Lynch. Because Peter Lynch is dead. He is dead. And he was a political prisoner. He was not responsible for violence. I saw the body cam footage, and that's what he did. He held up a sign talking about the corruption of the deep state in this country. He was sentenced to a barbaric term, and he is now dead. So I think Rebecca Jane is right, isn't she? We can't shut up about these people, Don Keith.
No, absolutely not. You know, Peter Lynch is probably the best example of Keir Starmer's incompetence. Peter Lynch is dead because of the system and because of this leftist government you have right now. But if you look at the totality of everything that has happened in this Labour government, the things that Keir Starmer has overseen, from failure on deportations, cutting the disability checks or attempting to cut the disability checks, taking the winter fuel allowance from pensioners, bragging about locking up over 400 people for a social media post, failing to conduct a national inquiry into the rape of 250,000 to 500,000 young white British girls by predominantly Muslim men. This guy's incompetence is on par with Joe Biden's, and Joe Biden had his age as an excuse. What's Keir Starmer's excuse for his incompetence?
Keir Starmer's excuse is evil. Actually, that's the point. It's true globalist evil. And I repeat, it's about control. And he is desperate to just keep a lid on the anger throughout the country. And Rebecca Jane, I guess what happened in those weeks after Southport, he got what he wanted in the short term because people were too terrified to say anything. People were too terrified to post on social media, let alone go out in the streets, because they knew that even if they were peacefully protesting, there was a chance that they would end up in prison for over 3 years. So it's worked for now. But I have a feeling when the election results come in this time in 8 days, I have a feeling the silenced majority, that's how I describe us. We are not silent, we are silenced. And I have a feeling, Rebecca, we're going to be very, very clear about how we feel about Starmer.
I feel like we've been clear for a really long time, Dan, and I don't really feel like it's making any difference. I've lost literally all hope. I have no hope whatsoever in any kind of politics in this country. I don't really have any hope in America either, so that's not an option. But I have no hope. You know, my only slight bit of hope, I really like Kemi Badenoch. Like, I think she's absolutely brilliant. There's nothing about the Labour Party that I've ever supported and would ever support. Literally nothing, actually. Reform, sorry, can't get behind Nigel. I like what the party stand for as a whole, but unfortunately, I think he'd be a shockingly awful leader. So I have very, very little to no hope. Not no hope, little to no hope.
Okay, well, given you've mentioned Kemi Badenoch, I do just want to play you. By the way, I sort of agree with you on the hope thing. And that's heartbreaking. And that's why I believe we've got to keep talking, and we can't just accept Nigel saying, oh, mass deportations are impossible, for example, and we have to consider alternatives like Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe. Like we can't just say, oh, let's go with this current option. We can't just do that. But it was interesting, though, because Farage really responded hard against this leaked recording yesterday from Robert Jenrick over some type of deal between Reform UK and the Conservative Party. Watch this.
Robert the Remainer. Good old Robert, the man who's been on the Damascene road to Damascus. I mean, the Damascene conversion on the road to Damascus. You will see on May the 2nd that our biggest gains are going to be in Labour voting areas. That is where we are making most impact. I would also tell you that the majority of our members and a big percentage of our voters at the last election were not voting Conservative because they loathed the Conservative Party. They could not put up with the level of betrayal that had happened since the 2019 80-seat majority. If we were to even contemplate doing a deal, I mean, our voters would be revolted by it. Our party itself internally would be in revolt. And if I wanted to do a deal with you of any kind, I would shake your hand, look you in the eye, and do that deal because I trusted you. I don't trust the Conservative Party in any way at all, and we are going to replace them. Thank you.
Doesn't he have a point about the Conservatives, Rebecca? I mean, I really like Robert Jenrick, for example, and I love everything Jenrick is saying, but I would really struggle to ever vote for the Conservative Party again after the betrayal of the past 14 years.
Yeah, listen, I get it. I do totally understand it, but one of my biggest issues with the Conservative Party was their previous leaders, and that was my biggest issue. However, what I want to say here about Nigel and all of his big talk there about how he won't do this and he won't do that. Does anybody remember the Brexit Party and what happened? Because I got an absolute load of fallout from that situation because he stood everybody down because he did do a pact, and actually there was a few conversations that I had with people who were very senior in Reform about us joining forces when I was doing the whole Unite Centre Right business. And I said to some people who ended up joining, I said, how can you do that with what he did with the Brexit Party? Because I'm telling you now, he's going to do the same again. And he did it at the last minute and he will do it again. I actually have no doubts because all he wants is the power. And what happened was those senior people had to get a legal document from him that said that if they joined the party, then he would not do a deal and he wouldn't stand candidates down at the very last minute. And I said that you might as well chuck that in the toilet because it means absolutely nothing. And Nigel will do what Nigel wants to do. He's saying it now because he thinks it's going to get him more votes. But when it comes to it and he realises he's losing, he will fold.
There will be a deal. There will be a deal. And actually, and as I say, I'm not ready to go all in for any party at this point. I don't think that's what we need to be doing. What we need to be doing is putting the pressure on any political figure on the right to go to where we need to be to save the country. Our borders are completely out of control. We have no free speech. There are some fundamental issues here, and we can win if we keep the pressure up. The example I would use would be the Supreme Court ruling over what is a woman. That was something that was unthinkable just a few years ago. So I hear what Rebecca Jane is saying. It is very easy to lose hope. Some days I do, believe me. But we can also win. But we don't necessarily win by 100% backing a political party. We have to do what's right. And on the issue of trans extremism, doing what's right was eventually what took us to a place where we could completely change the political narrative. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.